My parents ran a massive wholesale grocery operation at the city's central market. To the community, we were a prosperous, hard-working family. To my parents, I was simply a line of free, expendable labor. From the day I was old enough to carry a crate, my existence was defined by utility. I was the accident, the unplanned burden who arrived 3 years after their masterpiece. My sister, Vanessa, was the golden child. She was planned, anticipated, and practically worshipped. She attended a prestigious private academy, wore designer clothes, and her bedroom was a sprawling sanctuary on the second floor, complete with a private balcony and custom furniture. My parents treated her like royalty, shielding her from even the slightest discomfort. Then there was me. My room was a sweltering, low-ceilinged attic squeezed directly above our main commercial warehouse. It was an oven in July, an icebox in January, and it permanently reeked of damp cardboard, stale garlic, and forklift exhaust. At night, I fell asleep to the distinct sound of rats scratching inside the drywalls. My daily routine started at 4:30 a.m., hauling 50-pound sacks of rice and loading delivery trucks before crawling into a school desk, exhausted and smelling of the warehouse. My clothes were threadbare hand-me-downs from distant cousins. My shoes had soles so worn I could feel the cold concrete of the market floor through them. Vanessa's mistakes were always excused as growing pains. My minor slip-ups were met with harsh rebukes or extra shifts. I learned early on that my parents' approval didn't exist for me, so I poured every ounce of my remaining energy into my schoolwork. It wasn't for their validation, it was for my survival. I spent my nights under a single, buzzing fluorescent bulb in that suffocating attic, studying advanced mechanics and electrical schematics. When the State Technical Institute entrance results were released, I hadn't just passed, I had secured the highest score in the region for the elite automation engineering program. I still remember holding that heavy official acceptance letter. For a fleeting, foolish second, a surge of pride blinded me. I actually thought, maybe this will change things. Maybe they'll finally see me. I walked into the dining room and placed the letter on the table in front of my mother. My father didn't even look up from his accounting ledger. My mom glanced at the golden seal, her expression instantly hardening into a familiar look of cold irritation. Without a single word, she picked up the document, folded it, and tore it cleanly down the middle. She tossed the pieces into the trash can beside her. "We need you at the market," she said, her voice entirely flat, as if she were checking off a shopping list. "Your father's back is worsening, and we aren't wasting money hiring outside help. You're staying here." I stood there, paralyzed, watching my entire future sit among the coffee grounds and vegetable scraps. "I got a full scholarship," I managed to say, my voice tight. "It won't cost a single dime." My father slammed his ledger shut, the loud crack echoing off the walls. "Don't be a selfish brat," he snapped, his eyes glaring into mine. "Your sister is applying to an elite university in London. Do you have any idea what international tuition and housing cost? Every dollar we save on warehouse labor goes into her fund. You're our son, Leo. It's time you start sacrificing for this family." That was the exact moment the fog cleared and the final string snapped inside me. I wasn't a son. I was an unpaid servant whose life was being liquidated to buy a crown for their princess. Aunt Clara was the only real family I had. In a world where my parents treated me like an invisible ghost, she actually saw me. She was a traditional tailor, running a quiet little dressmaking shop down a narrow alley away from the chaotic market. Her shop smelled of pressed linen and cedarwood, a sanctuary of absolute calm. While my parents worked me to the bone, Aunt Clara would slide me into her studio. She taught me the patience of drafting patterns, the precision needed for a perfect stitch, and the quiet dignity of working with your hands. Once, when I was 12, she patted my shoulder and said, "You have a brilliant mind and a heavy heart, Leo. Don't let them make you feel small. You are worth so much more than they see." Those words were my lifeline. But then, she got sick. Watching her fade during my brief, stolen hospital visits ripped away my last anchor. When she passed, I felt utterly untethered.
At the funeral, my parents shed dry, rehearsed tears for the sake of appearances. Vanessa, who hadn't visited Aunt Clara in years, instantly became the center of attention, sobbing loudly while relatives coddled her. I stood in the corner, a numb, invisible spectator to my own grief. My parents never asked how I was doing. They were too busy worrying about how devastated Vanessa was. 6 months later, the final hammer fell. Vanessa slouched back from London, having dropped out of university after burning through her massive tuition fund. Worse, she'd brought along a pretentious, arrogant husband she'd hastily married, a man with massive credit debts and no job. My parents welcomed them back like conquering heroes. The next morning, my mother walked up to my attic room. She didn't look at me, just gestured coldly at my desk. "Pack your things. Vanessa and her husband are moving into the main house permanently. They need this attic space to convert into a home office and a walk-in wardrobe for their designer clothes." I stared at her, stunned. Where am I supposed to go? She sighed, deeply annoyed that I was even questioning her. "We put a mattress for you in the tin supply shed out by the truck parking lot. It's fine. You only use this place to sleep anyway." There was no discussion, no compromise. I was entirely evicted from my cramped attic so my sister's deadbeat husband could have a lounge. The new shack was a living nightmare. It was a crude structure of corrugated iron sheets right next to the diesel-choked market loading docks. It leaked whenever it rained, and the rusted walls shook violently every time a delivery truck idled nearby. The air inside was freezing, thick with exhaust fumes, and the dampness crept straight into my bones. Lying on that thin mattress in the pitch black, shivering as I listened to the muffled laughter coming from the warm main house across the lot, I knew I was done. Aunt Clara would have fought for me, but she was gone, and there was no one left to tell me I mattered.
On a freezing, torrential Tuesday night, the tin roof of my shack was rattling so loud it felt like it would cave in. Cold rain was dripping directly onto my thin blanket. I looked across the lot at the glowing warm windows of the main house. I realized I couldn't survive another day there. I packed my few hand-me-down clothes into an old canvas sack and walked out into the storm. I didn't leave a note. I didn't say goodbye. I just slipped into the dark, leaving that toxic household behind forever. The first few weeks were a brutal blur of survival. I slept in cheap transit stations, ate whatever food I could scrape together, and knocked on every door looking for any manual labor. I was exhausted, but for the first time in my life, the air didn't feel heavy. I was free. Eventually, I wandered into a quiet artisan district on the edge of the city and stumbled upon an unassuming workshop with a faded wooden sign, Fiona's Antique Restoration. The moment I stepped inside, the chaotic noise of the world vanished, replaced by the rich, comforting scent of sawdust, beeswax, and aged walnut. That was where I met Miss Fiona. She was a master artisan in her late 50s, with sharp, perceptive eyes, silver-streaked hair tied back, and hands deeply calloused from decades of labor. She was a no-nonsense woman who commanded absolute respect in a traditionally male-dominated trade. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my worn-out shoes and hollow cheeks. "You look like you're running from a storm, kid," she said, her voice gravelly but calm. "You know anything about woodwork?" "No," I admitted honestly, looking her straight in the eye. "But I know how to be precise, I learn fast, and I'm not afraid of hard work. I just need a place to start." She studied me for a long, agonizing moment. Then she pointed to a pile of rough lumber and a traditional hand plane. "Smooth that block down. Let's see what your hands can do." Because of the countless hours I'd spent helping Aunt Clara with her delicate pattern cutting and stitching, my hands were surprisingly steady and patient. I didn't rush or force the tool. I adjusted my posture and focused entirely on the grain of the wood. Miss Fiona watched in total silence. When I finished, she ran her thumb over the smooth surface, then looked up at me with a definitive nod. "You have patience. That's a rare currency these days. I have a small, dry storage room in the back. It's got a cot, heating, and a door that locks. It's yours if you want it. The pay isn't much to start, but it's honest work. Do we have a deal?" I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." Moving into that tiny back room felt like a sanctuary.
It was clean, warm, and secure. Miss Fiona became the mentor I never knew I needed. She wasn't overly affectionate, but she was fiercely fair, something my parents never were. She judged me solely on the merit of my output. I threw my entire soul into the craft, working day and night to master joinery, wood grains, and traditional restoration. For the first time, I wasn't treated like an unwanted mistake. In the quiet rhythm of the workshop, I was finally carving out my own purpose.
6 years flew by in a blur of sawdust, sweat, and calluses. Under Miss Fiona's rigorous guidance, I didn't just learn a trade, I became an expert. My steady hands and meticulous eye earned her absolute trust, and eventually she made me a junior partner in the restoration business. I saved every single dollar I earned, still living frugally in that small back room. Last year, I finally achieved what I thought was impossible. I bought a small, neglected plot of land on the edge of the city that came with a dilapidated timber house. It was a complete fixer-upper, but over months of late nights and weekends, I restored it entirely with my own hands. It was beautiful, solid, and completely mine. I thought I had finally outrun the shadows of my past. I was wrong. On a quiet Thursday afternoon, the heavy wooden doors of the workshop swung open. I looked up from a mid-century walnut cabinet I was polishing, expecting a client. Instead, my stomach violently dropped. There they were, my mother, my father, and Vanessa. They looked older, the harsh stress of the market etched deep into their faces, stripped of their usual arrogant posture. My mother stepped forward, her face twisting into a hideous, forced smile that made my skin crawl. "Leo," she breathed, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "Look how grown up you are. We heard that we're doing so well here, a partner in the shop and that you bought a beautiful new house." "What do you want?" I asked. My voice was flat, cold, and dead. I didn't step out from behind my workbench. My father stepped forward, his old demanding tone flaring up despite his desperate eyes. "Your sister's husband got mixed up with some dangerous predatory lenders at the market. They're threatening to seize our entire wholesale inventory. We need $50,000 immediately to clear her debt. We know you have the equity. You need to sell your house or liquidate your share of this shop. We're family, Leo. You can't just hoard your wealth while your sister's life is ruined." Vanessa stood behind them, nodding righteously, as if my sacrifice was still her birthright. A dark, venomous laugh escaped my throat. I looked at the 3 people who had ripped up my scholarship, banished me to a freezing tin shed, and treated me like an expendable dog. "Family," I said, finally stepping out from behind the bench. I slammed my heavy steel chisel onto the wood, the loud crack echoing through the room. "You threw me to the rats so she could burn through a tuition fund in London. You took away my education, my room, and my dignity. I built this life out of the dirt you left me in. I don't owe you a single cent, and I don't owe her a damn thing." Vanessa started shrieking, calling me a heartless monster, while my mother tried to step closer to grab my arm, crying about maternal duty. "Get the hell out of my shop," I roared, the sheer force of my voice causing them to jump back. "If any of you ever step foot on my property or near this workshop again, I will have you arrested for trespassing. You are nothing to me." Seeing the absolute, unyielding rage in my eyes, they backed away, shouting bitter curses as they retreated out the door. As the doors slammed shut, my chest heaved. I was shaking, but not with fear. It was the intoxicating, powerful realization that they no longer held a single shred of power over me. I was entirely free.
The confrontation left a lingering restlessness in my bones. Seeking a distraction, I decided to finally examine an old, heavy mahogany sewing chest that had belonged to Aunt Clara. I had dragged it with me the night I ran away, but had never possessed the emotional strength to thoroughly clean it out. As I removed the deep velvet thread trays to polish the interior wood, I noticed the bottom panel felt uneven. I pressed a small brass leaf ornament near the corner, and a hidden false bottom clicked upward.
Inside lay a thick manila envelope bearing my name in Aunt Clara's elegant, precise handwriting. Unfolding the documents inside, my breath hitched. It was a certified copy of a secret will she had executed a year before her sudden illness. Aunt Clara hadn't left her modest life savings in the sole ownership of her alley dressmaking shop to my mother, as my parents had claimed. She had left it all exclusively to me, meant to be a financial cushion for my future. But the envelope contained something else, a secondary set of bank notifications and public property transfer receipts from the year I turned 18. The horrific truth laid itself bare. Immediately after Aunt Clara's funeral, my parents had intercepted the legal execution notices. Exploiting my complete isolation in the tin shed, they had forged my signature on the asset release forms. They had sold her shop and transferred every single cent of my inheritance, nearly $80,000, directly into Vanessa's personal accounts to fund her disastrous time in London. They hadn't just neglected me. They had actively ruined my future and stolen the only safety net I was ever meant to have. The next morning, I took the entire file to a sharp estate attorney, Mr. Vance. He reviewed the forged signatures, his expression darkening with every page he turned. "This is blatant criminal fraud, Leo," Mr. Vance said, looking up with a grim expression. "They capitalized on your age and your subsequent disappearance to liquidate your assets. The paper trail they left is incredibly sloppy because they never expected you to survive, let alone find this. We have more than enough evidence to build an airtight case. We can strip back the transfers and hold them fully accountable." Sitting in that office, the heavy grief I had carried for years instantly calcified into a freezing, unyielding rage. They had spent my entire life treating me like an expendable ghost while stealing my labor, my education, and my aunt's parting gift just to prop up their golden child. "File the lawsuit," I told him, my voice dead and devoid of a single shred of mercy. "Take them to court. I want everything back." The legal process was a brutal, grueling war. My parents didn't go down quietly. When the official court summons arrived, they tried every manipulative tactic in the book. My mother bombarded my phone with sobbing voicemails, begging me not to ruin the family's reputation over a misunderstanding. My father even showed up at the workshop once, slamming his fists on the counter and screaming that I was an ungrateful monster who was trying to put his own parents in prison. I didn't say a single word. I just stood there with my arms crossed until the police arrived and escorted him off the premises. When we finally stood in the courtroom, their defense was pathetic. They didn't deny taking the money. Instead, they tried to justify it under the guise of parental authority. Their lawyer argued that they had acted in the best financial interest of the collective household, claiming Vanessa's precarious situation in London required immediate family intervention, and that they fully intended to compensate me later in life. Mr. Vance completely dismantled them. He presented the forged signatures side by side with my actual handwriting, followed by the bank records proving the stolen funds went straight to luxury rentals, high-end tuition, and designer shops in London, not a family emergency. Watching my parents on the witness stand was a strange experience. The old commanding aura they used to terrify me with in that stifling attic was completely gone. They looked small, desperate, and exposed under the courtroom lights. Vanessa sat behind them, glaring at me with pure venom, still completely convinced she was the rightful victim in this story. The judge's verdict was swift and devastating. He condemned my parents' actions as a calculated, malicious betrayal of trust. The court ordered them to pay full restitution, the entire $80,000, plus a decade's worth of accrued interest in legal fees. To cover the massive judgment, they were forced to liquidate their wholesale grocery inventory and sell their prime retail stalls at the Central Market, the very business they had sacrificed my childhood to build. Vanessa's deadbeat husband immediately packed his bags and abandoned her the moment the wealth vanished, leaving my sister and parents crammed into a miserable, cheap rental apartment, bitterly blaming each other for their ruin. For the first time in my life, a profound sense of peace settled over my chest. Winning wasn't about the money, it was about the absolute vindication. I had looked my abusers in the eye, stood my ground, and used the law to break the chains of their exploitation. I officially changed my phone number, blocked every remaining avenue of contact, and legally severed ties with them permanently. They could keep their golden child. I was officially done being their ghost. That evening, I sat on the porch of my restored timber house, watching the sunset bleed a deep amber across the horizon. Miss Fiona and the guys from the workshop were inside, laughing around the dinner table, the rich aroma of a home-cooked meal drifting through the screen door. I looked down at Aunt Clara's mahogany sewing chest, resting safely beside my chair. I realized then that family isn't an accident of biology. It isn't the people who share your blood while draining your spirit. True family is found in the people who see your worth, who hold a lantern for you in the dark, and who help you build a life on your own terms. I had finally found my home. I had honored the only woman who ever loved me, and for the first time in my life, I was completely free.